She's an undercover cop sent to investigate a billionaire suspected of running an underground crime empire. He's charming, intelligent, and dangerously unpredictable. She thought she could stay professional, but as she gets closer, the lines between duty and desire blur. The sharp click of Lena Carter's heels echoed through the grand marble lobby of Blackwood Enterprises. Everything about the place screamed power: sleek glass walls, gold accents, and employees who moved with purpose, as if working for a king rather than a CEO. And in a way, Adrian Blackwood was a king. Billionaire, business mogul, suspected criminal mastermind. Lena had spent months preparing for this mission, memorizing every detail about the man she was here to bring down. She was trained to be unreadable, to blend in and gain trust. But nothing prepared her for the moment she stepped into his world. A deep, smooth voice cut through the room. "You must be my new assistant." She turned, and there he was. Adrian Blackwood stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city skyline casting a sharp contrast against his tailored black suit. He had an effortless confidence, a presence that demanded attention. Dark eyes locked onto hers, unreadable yet assessing. Lena forced a polite smile. "Lena Carter, sir. It's a pleasure." His lips curved slightly, as if amused by her formality. "Let's see if you mean that after a week." He turned, gesturing for her to follow him into his office. Lena inhaled, steadying herself. She wasn't here to be charmed. She was here to find the truth. And if Adrian Blackwood was truly the criminal they suspected him to be, she would be the one to take him down. Lena followed Adrian into his office, her heels sinking into the plush carpet. The space was just as striking as the man himself, modern, sleek, and impossibly expensive. A wall of floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, while dark oak shelves lined with rare books and art pieces framed the room. Adrian moved with deliberate ease, settling behind a massive glass desk. He gestured toward the chair opposite him. "Sit." Lena complied, keeping her expression neutral. She had spent weeks preparing for this, learning how to blend in, how to play the role of the perfect assistant. But nothing in her training had prepared her for Adrian Blackwood in person. Up close, he was even more dangerous. Not in the obvious, gun-to-the-head way. No, Adrian's danger lay in the way he watched people, how he made them feel seen. And right now, his sharp gaze was locked on her, studying, calculating. "You have an impressive resume," he said, tapping a finger on the file in front of him. "Fluent in 3 languages. Business degree. Worked under some of the best CEOs in the industry." Lena tilted her head slightly. "Is that a compliment?" His lips quirked. "An observation." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "Tell me, Lena Carter, why did you apply for this job?" "A test." She had expected this. Adrian Blackwood didn't trust easily, and he had every reason to be cautious. She met his gaze without hesitation. "Because working for the best opens doors." His expression didn't change, but she saw something flicker in his eyes. Approval, maybe. Or curiosity. "And you don't mind my reputation?" he asked, voice smooth as silk. Lena gave him a practiced smile. "Which one?" He chuckled, the sound low and knowing. "Good answer." The tension in the air shifted. A silent battle of wills had begun, and Lena knew she had just passed the first test. But as she sat across from Adrian Blackwood, she reminded herself of one thing. She wasn't here to impress him. She was here to bring him down. Lena kept her posture relaxed as Adrian studied her, his fingers drumming lightly against the surface of his desk. There was something unreadable in his gaze, something that made her pulse quicken in a way she refused to acknowledge. She was playing a role. Nothing more. "Tell me, Miss Carter," Adrian said, his voice smooth, almost amused. "What do you know about Blackwood Enterprises?" Lena had spent weeks memorizing every detail about his empire. She knew exactly what to say. Blackwood Enterprises dominates multiple industries: technology, finance, and luxury real estate, she said evenly. "Your company has seen a 200% revenue increase in the last 5 years, making you one of the youngest self-made billionaires in the world." Adrian's lips curved slightly. "Flattering." But that's all public information. She met his gaze without flinching. You're known for your aggressive business tactics, acquiring competitors before they can threaten you. Some call it ruthless, others call it strategic. His dark eyes gleamed with amusement. And which side do you fall on, Miss Carter? She gave a small, polite smile. I think power is often misunderstood. Adrian chuckled, shaking his head as if she had just passed another one of his invisible tests. Interesting perspective. He leaned back in his chair, watching her with the ease of a man who is used to being in control. Why don't we skip the usual formalities? I need an assistant who can anticipate my needs before I ask. Someone who can handle pressure, think fast, and, most importantly, keep secrets. Her heart pounded at that last word.
Secrets.
Was he already testing her? Did he suspect something? I can handle pressure, she said calmly. And I understand the value of discretion. Adrian tilted his head slightly. Good. He gestured toward a stack of folders on his desk. Your first task, go through these files and brief me on anything out of place. You have until the end of the day. Lena reached for the files, careful to maintain a composed expression. This was what she had trained for, getting inside, gaining his trust, and uncovering his secrets. But as she stood to leave, Adrian's voice stopped her. One more thing, Miss Carter. She turned, meeting his gaze once more. I don't trust easily, he said, his tone unreadable. Prove to me that I should. Lena forced a small nod, then walked out of the office, her mind already racing. This was just the beginning. She had infiltrated his world. Now she had to survive it. Lena spent the next few hours buried in paperwork, sifting through endless reports on Blackwood Enterprises' latest acquisitions. At first glance, everything seemed legitimate, just a billionaire expanding his empire. But Lena wasn't looking for what was on the surface. She was searching for hidden trails, inconsistencies, anything that could tie Adrian Blackwood to the criminal underworld. And after hours of careful searching, she found something. A series of offshore transactions, just small enough to avoid red flags. Money moving between shell companies, disguised as investment funds. It wasn't solid proof, but it was a start. Just as she was about to take notes, her phone buzzed. A message from her handler. Meet in 15 minutes. Parking garage. Lena quickly closed the file, grabbed her coat, and slipped out of the office unnoticed. She took the elevator down to the underground parking lot, where a black sedan waited in the shadows. She slid into the passenger seat. A middle-aged man with graying hair sat in the driver's seat, his eyes sharp. Detective Ross, her direct superior. You're inside, Ross said, skipping formalities. Lena nodded. And I'm already seeing red flags. There's a money trail. It's hidden well, but I can track it. Ross nodded, his expression grim. Good. But be careful. Blackwood isn't just another businessman. He's connected to people who make problems disappear. Lena clenched her jaw. She knew the risks, but she had a mission to complete. I can handle him, she said firmly. Ross gave her a look that was both approving and concerned. Don't get too close, Carter. Lena exhaled slowly. She had spent years in undercover work, learning how to distance herself. She knew the rules. But as she replayed her earlier conversation with Adrian, the way he watched her, the way his presence felt like a carefully set trap, she couldn't shake the feeling that this mission was different. She wasn't sure if she was hunting Adrian Blackwood, or if he was already hunting her. Lena returned to the office, her pulse steady despite the warning Ross had given her. Don't get too close. She had heard those words before, but getting close was part of the job. She had spent years blending into dangerous worlds, gaining the trust of criminals only to bring them down when they least expected it. Adrian Blackwood would be no different. At least, that's what she told herself. She pushed open the glass doors to Adrian's private office, balancing a tablet in one hand and a stack of reports in the other. He was exactly where she had left him, behind his desk, effortlessly powerful, like a king surveying his empire. But this time, he wasn't alone. A man stood near the window, speaking in hushed tones. He was older, maybe late 40s, with a sharp gaze that flickered toward Lena the moment she entered. There was something about him, something dangerous. Adrian glanced up, his expression unreadable. "Lena, come in." She hesitated for only a second before walking forward, her heels clicking against the marble floor. The older man studied her, his gaze lingering just a little too long. "This is Victor Langley," Adrian said smoothly. "An old business associate." Lena gave a polite nod. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Langley." Langley didn't smile. "I wasn't aware Adrian had hired a new assistant." His tone was casual, but Lena heard the underlying suspicion. "She's quite competent," Adrian said before Lena could reply. "And I don't believe in second-guessing my choices." Langley chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "Of course. Just looking out for you, my friend." Something about the way he said it put Lena on edge. There was an unspoken tension between the two men, a silent conversation happening beneath the surface. "Lena," Adrian said, turning his attention back to her. "Do you have the reports?" She nodded and handed them over, keeping her expression neutral. "Good." Adrian glanced through the files, then looked up at her. "That will be all for now." It was a dismissal. Lena cast one last glance at Langley before turning to leave. But as she reached the door, she caught a snippet of their conversation. "She's too sharp," Langley murmured. "You might want to keep an eye on her." Lena didn't pause, didn't react. She simply walked out, keeping her breathing steady. Adrian Blackwood wasn't just powerful, he was surrounded by people who were just as dangerous. And if Langley already suspected her, it meant she needed to be even more careful. This mission was getting riskier by the second, and she had no room for mistakes. Lena barely had time to settle at her desk before a message popped up on her work tablet. "Adrian Blackwood, come to my office."
Now.
A strange pulse of anticipation ran through her. She inhaled deeply, squared her shoulders, and walked back to his office, keeping her expression carefully controlled. Adrian was waiting, leaning back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. He didn't say anything at first, just watched her with those sharp, assessing eyes. Finally, he spoke. "What do you think of Victor Langley?" Lena hesitated. Was this another test? She kept her voice measured. "He seems careful." A small smirk touched Adrian's lips. That's one way to put it. Silence stretched between them. Then, Adrian leaned forward, his gaze locking onto hers. "You walked in at an inconvenient time," he said. "Langley doesn't trust new faces easily. And when he doesn't trust someone, bad things tend to happen." The air in the room felt heavier, the warning unspoken but clear. Lena met his gaze, without flinching. "Are you telling me to be careful?" Adrian's smirk deepened, but there was something unreadable in his eyes. "I'm telling you that in my world, trust isn't given freely." She tilted her head slightly. "And, do you trust him?" Adrian chuckled, but there was no warmth in it. "I trust that he will always do what's in his best interest." Lena nodded, filing that information away. Langley wasn't just another businessman. He was a threat and possibly a key to unlocking the truth about Adrian's empire. "I'll keep that in mind," she said smoothly. Adrian studied her for another long moment before standing up. "Come with me." Lena blinked. "Where?" "You want to understand how my business works, don't you?" His dark eyes gleamed with something almost challenging. "Consider this your first real lesson." Lena's pulse quickened. Was he testing her again? Or was this an opportunity? Either way, she couldn't refuse. She nodded. "Lead the way." Adrian drove himself, which surprised Lena. She had expected a driver, security, something more fitting for a man of his status. But as they wove through the city streets in a sleek black Aston Martin, she realized Adrian Blackwood was a man who liked control. "Where are we going?" she asked, glancing at him. He smirked. "Patience, Miss Carter." Lena clenched her jaw, forcing herself to relax. She had been on undercover missions before. But this was different. Adrian wasn't just another suspect. He was a man who saw too much. And she had this sinking feeling that he was already playing his own game with her. Minutes later, they pulled into an underground parking lot. Adrian stepped out first, buttoning his suit jacket with practiced ease. Lena followed, her heels clicking softly against the concrete. The place was nearly empty, except for a single man waiting near an unmarked door. Adrian led her forward. The man, dressed in all black, gave a small nod before unlocking the door and stepping aside. "After you," Adrian said smoothly, gesturing for Lena to enter first. Lena hesitated for only a fraction of a second before stepping inside. She had walked into plenty of dangerous situations before, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't sure if she was the hunter or the prey. The door clicked shut behind Lena, leaving her alone with Adrian in the dimly lit room. Her instincts sharpened instantly. No windows. Just a sleek, minimalist space with a long table in the center and monitors mounted on the walls. The air smelled of expensive cologne and leather, but beneath it was something else. Something cold and calculated. A meeting room? A control center? Adrian stepped past her, his presence an undeniable force as he moved toward the table. A flick of his fingers and the monitors lit up, displaying data she barely had time to process. Financial records, property holdings, offshore accounts. This wasn't just business. This was power. "You're quiet," Adrian mused, tilting his head toward her. "Most people have something to say when I bring them here." Lena kept her expression neutral. "Most people aren't me." Adrian's lips curved slightly. "No, they're not." The air between them crackled with something unspoken. He was testing her, again, seeing how much she could handle. She walked forward, her eyes scanning the monitors. Some of the data matched what she had seen earlier, legitimate transactions. But other numbers stood out. Companies she didn't recognize. Numbers that didn't quite add up. Her pulse picked up. This could be it. The proof she needed. "You brought me here to test me," she said, turning to face him. "To see how much I understand." Adrian chuckled, the sound rich and knowing. Perhaps. He leaned against the table, watching her. "Or maybe I just wanted to see how you react to power." Lena met his gaze without hesitation. Power is only dangerous when it's unchecked. Adrian's smirk deepened. "A woman with opinions. I do like that." He stepped closer, his presence brushing against hers. Lena held her ground, refusing to let him see the way her breath hitched. She had been trained for this. She had walked into the lion's den before. But Adrian Blackwood wasn't just a lion. He was a predator who knew exactly when to play with his prey. "You've been with my company for a day, and yet..." He reached past her, brushing against her shoulder as he tapped a few keys on the screen. "You already look like you belong here." Lena forced a small smirk. "Is that a compliment?" Adrian's gaze lingered on her. An observation. The same words he had used in their first conversation. The air between them was thick with unspoken tension, a dance of words and power neither of them was willing to lose. But Lena wasn't here to play games. She was here to win. She turned back to the screen, shifting her focus. "These transactions," she said, pointing to one of the files. "They don't match the patterns of your other investments. Why are they hidden under shell companies?" Adrian didn't blink. Instead, he smiled, a slow, deliberate curve of his lips that sent a strange thrill through her. "Curious, aren't you?" Lena tilted her head. "It's my job to pay attention." He studied her for a long moment, and for the first time, Lena felt something shift in his expression. Approval, or something far more dangerous. "I like you, Lena," he murmured, his voice softer now, more intimate. "You're not afraid to ask questions." She held her breath as he reached out, his fingers brushing against her wrist. Just a fleeting touch, but enough to make her stomach tighten. It was a warning, a challenge, and maybe to promise. Adrian Blackwood wasn't just testing her. He was watching, waiting, unraveling her piece by piece. And if she wasn't careful, she might just let him. Lena left the meeting room with her mind racing. Adrian was too smart, too controlled. He hadn't denied the offshore accounts, hadn't even seemed concerned that she had noticed them. Was he toying with her? Or was this something else? She needed more information. That night, long after the offices had emptied, Lena slipped into the archive room, her fingers moving quickly over the security panel. It took her exactly 7 seconds to override the system, long enough for her to get in, but not long enough to leave a trace. She scanned through the files, her eyes searching for anything that would link Adrian to criminal activity. And then, footsteps. Lena froze. A shadow moved past the frosted glass door. She pressed herself against the shelves, heart pounding. Who else would be here this late? The door creaked open. Lena held her breath as a familiar voice spoke into the darkness. I had a feeling you'd be here. Adrian. Her pulse skittered, but she forced herself to stay calm. She stepped out from the shadows, meeting his gaze. Couldn't sleep, she said smoothly. Figured I'd get a head start on my research. Adrian watched her, his expression unreadable. Research? She held up a random file. I like to be prepared. He stepped closer, the dim lighting casting sharp angles on his face. That's a dangerous habit. Lena tilted her head. Why? Adrian reached out, taking the file from her hands. And then, in a move so quick she barely had time to react, he backed her against the shelves, his hands braced on either side of her. The air between them turned electric. Because, Miss Carter, he murmured, his voice dark and velvet smooth, curiosity has a way of getting people into trouble. Lena swallowed. She could feel the heat of his body, the quiet strength in the way he caged her in. She knew she should push him away, should step back, should remind herself why she was here. But Adrian Blackwood wasn't just another mark. And for the first time in her career, Lena wasn't sure if she was still in control. Lena's breath caught as Adrian's eyes darkened, scanning her with something between curiosity and suspicion. She needed to move, to defuse the tension, to escape. But Adrian didn't make it easy. You're playing a dangerous game, he murmured. Lena met his gaze head-on. And if I am? His smirk was slow, deliberate. Then I hope you know how to win. His voice sent a shiver down her spine. She had been trained for moments like this, to lie, to manipulate, to control the situation. But with Adrian it was different. Because, for the first time, she wasn't sure if she was the one doing the manipulating, or if he was playing her just as skillfully. Then, just as quickly as he had cornered her, Adrian stepped back. I'll pretend I didn't see you here, he said, his voice lighter now, almost teasing. But don't let it happen again. Lena nodded, gripping the file in her hands. Understood. But as she turned to leave, she could feel his gaze still on her. And she knew this wasn't over. Not yet. Lena had spent years undercover, but this mission was different. Because she wasn't just gathering evidence anymore. She was getting too close. She had been watching Adrian, but now he was watching her, too. Testing her. Waiting for her next move. And that made him even more dangerous. So she made a choice. She was going to end this. That night, she sent a coded message to Ross, her handler. I have enough. Move in tomorrow. It was time. She had everything she needed, financial proof, records of illicit deals, and the offshore accounts Adrian had so carefully hidden. Tomorrow, the FBI would raid Blackwood Enterprises. And Adrian Blackwood would be arrested. The next morning, Lena walked into Adrian's office for the last time. He was waiting, as if he already knew. You look different today, he mused, studying her. Something on your mind? Lena forced a smile. Just another day at work. Adrian tilted his head. Is that so? Before she could reply, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, then smiled. One of those slow, knowing smiles that sent a chill through her. Then he stood and walked around the desk until he was right in front of her. I have a question for you, Lena. His voice was calm, almost amused. Did you really think I wouldn't figure it out? Lena's heart stopped. He knew. Her cover was blown. She didn't have time to react before strong arms grabbed her from behind. Two of Adrian's security guards restrained her, twisting her arms behind her back. Adrian leaned in, his lips brushing her ear as he whispered, You underestimated me. Her pulse pounded. You're making a mistake. His smile was unreadable. Am I? Then he nodded to his men. Take her. Lena struggled, but it was no use. She had walked into a trap. And now, she was at Adrian Blackwood's mercy. Lena had been locked away before. Interrogated. Threatened. But never like this. She sat in a dimly lit room, wrists bound to the chair, as Adrian leaned casually against the wall. "You put up a good act," he said, "but I don't trust easily." Lena swallowed. "So what now? Are you going to kill me?" Adrian chuckled. "Kill you?" He moved closer, crouching in front of her. "No, Lena. I have a much better idea." His fingers brushed against her cheek, sending a shiver down her spine. "I'm offering you a choice." Her jaw clenched. "What kind of choice?" Adrian smiled. "You work for me now." Lena's breath caught. "Excuse me? You're smart, clever, ruthless, when you need to be." His eyes gleamed. "I could use someone like you." She stared at him, stunned. She had expected threats. Torture. Death. Not this. Not Adrian Blackwood asking her to stand by his side. She should have said no. Should have spat in his face and told him she would rather die. But instead, she hesitated. And Adrian saw it. His smirk deepened. "I'll give you time to think." Then he turned and walked away, leaving Lena alone. And for the first time since this mission began, she didn't know what she was going to do. Lena had always believed in black and white, good and evil, right and wrong. But after Adrian Blackwood, she wasn't so sure anymore. Because in the end, she didn't turn him in. She walked out of that room and into the unknown, leaving behind the life she once knew. For more stories, and as she stepped into Adrian's Eververse novel, she realized she had already fallen. And there was no turning back.